Hmm.
Woohoo!
Do you know what excites me more about philosophy than any other single thing?
The fact that it's about like everything.
You know, that's a pretty good answer. What I was going to say in a single word is being. Being. Sort of a weird word, a weird use of a word.
It is a weird word.
What do you think? What do you think we mean in philosophy when we use the word being?
Like your consciousness.
Well, that's another good answer. So that's one of the ways that being is used in philosophy. It's used as a distinction to what's outside of us, right? So being is the world as experienced, and reality or the world would be what's outside of us, in regardless of our experience of it.
Okay.
Does that distinction make sense?
Yes.
So the two branches of philosophy that have kind of broken off, or that the distinction that we like to make in philosophy to define those two kinds of philosophy are phenomenology, which means you are studying the phenomena as experienced, and empiricism, which means that there's sort of this empirical reality outside of us. Can you think of another way that being might be used in philosophy?
Maybe it could be used as like, I don't know, like a way to talk about like the afterlife.
Yeah, it could be. The context I'm really thinking of is what you said, I think, initially about what gets me excited about, or that you thought maybe got me excited about philosophy, is that it's about everything. So being can also be a way to talk about there being something versus nothing.
Yeah.
Right? So being all of this. Right? So let's unpack a little bit these two different ways that being is used. And the thing that we're going to get to at the end, I don't want to give spoilers, right?
Spoilers.
Philosophy in this context, in the way that we're going to talk about it now, is more than trying to analyze the world. It's a feeling as well. And that's kind of exciting. We talked about phenomenology versus empiricism.
Yes.
And let me just preface this by saying that this is somewhat of an artificial distinction, I think, that philosophy makes.
Yeah, it is very. I understand why.
So why do you find that somewhat of an artificial distinction?
Because it's literally impossible to see the world completely, like objectively, like not out of your eyes.
That's a very phenomenological statement, right? I think that there are certainly, in a naive sense of phenomenology or that branch of philosophy, people would say that that's exactly right. That it's impossible to experience the world outside of how we as human beings perceive it, so perception is all you can really know. Have you ever heard the famous philosophical phrase, cogito ergo sum?
I think you can generally assume that I don't know any famous philosophical phrase.
Well, it's a famous Latin phrase. So it means I think, therefore I am.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
So Descartes said that. And that was his essential fundamental statement of where knowledge has to begin. Right?
Yeah.
Is that, and I want you to kind of understand this, is that he said the only thing you can really know is that you are at this moment thinking.
Technically true.
Right? And so, since he said there's clearly, the one thing I do know is there is a subject thinking right now, that I at least know that exists.
Yeah.
So I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
Make sense?
It makes sense.
Do you think we can know anything outside of our perceptions?
We cannot know anything outside of perceptions, because all like the knowledge we learn, like everything like we perceive, it all like comes through like the human mind.
I think that that's a common philosophical statement, that we can't know anything outside of our perceptions. And I think that it's something that modern culture has really latched onto. But let's unpack that a little bit and see if we really think that, right? Because to some degree, we started this series with the question of, why do people disagree?
Yeah.
And if everything is a matter of perception, then, and we're all different as perceivers, then the source of our disagreement isn't particularly surprising.
No.
There should be as many different views of the universe as there are people.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. Having said that, what about science? Science makes claims about the objective world. Do you think those claims are completely bogus and without any merit?
Well, I think I said this in like one of the first few episodes, that technically there's nothing that we can actually prove besides I think, therefore I am. You know, like it's all can be based on our own perception. Can't get into anyone else's head. We can't view the world objectively. But you have to, at a certain point, assume that some things are true, and even if they aren't true, it does not, at that point, it does not matter whether they're true or not, because you perceive them as true. It's like the sky is blue, you know? You can't really question that, because if you're questioning that, then you're questioning everything. You know, you have to take some things as true. And there's no way to prove that the sky is blue. So, science is based off of these things that we assume are true, and while there is no guarantee that these things are true, you do have to assume that they're true.
So on some level, I think that you're right in saying that we have to assume that some things are true in order to make any statements about the world at all.
Yeah.
But I think we need to unpack that a little bit. I think we need to understand where that is or what that comes from or whatever else. So let's step back to another thing that we've discussed. And that is, most of our information or beliefs about the world aren't really based on our own observations about the world.
Yeah.
They're based on our trust in other people who've made observations about the world.
Yeah.
I'd like to step that back even a little bit further. What about our own personal history or the history of the world? Are those things that are objectively true, or you can make objective statements about? Whether you believe it or not, was Abraham Lincoln a president of the United States at some point?
That's something that happened before anyone on this earth that's living today was born. So technically, there's literally no way to prove that. And so a lot of people don't believe that. But seeing that it is like entirely outside of the realm of something that can be proven, whether or not you believe it is entirely based on trust, and I think a lot of people do believe it.
I think probably the primary way that I personally have gotten out of the skeptical paradox, which is really what we're dealing with, right?
Yeah.
I mean, with Descartes' view of the world, all we can ever really know is that we are a thinking entity.
Yes.
And that leads to a philosophical belief, logically, that we call solipsism, which means that I'm the only thing in the universe.
Okay, well, yeah.
But you can understand how that would come from that, right?
Yeah, no, I totally get that, and I understand how that's like a philosophical belief. But I'm instantly getting flashbacks to literally every time we've said that believing you are the only one in the universe, in the center of your own universe, is the worst thing to think in philosophy.
We've certainly learned that it doesn't lead to the good life.
No.
Right? And so in as far as philosophy should lead to that, it's certainly not a good belief. And I think it's also a bankrupt philosophical belief. And the reason I believe that is in how I get outside of the skeptical paradox is to consider everything that goes into the statement cogito ergo sum. That's a linguistic statement. That's something that uses language. So to even come up with that statement, you have to have learned a language.
Yeah.
Or well, who taught you that language?
As a whole, languages have been, like, I guess, formed from people by people originally. Language was also developed as a tool to communicate with other people, and so, like, it was taught to me by, like, you and like my parents and stuff. But also in a way that language developed, I was taught that language by, like, the entirety of humankind, or the entirety of English-speaking humankind.
Right, and so I think that's kind of my point. There are so many things that we assume to be true in even being able to make that statement that are already assumptions of knowledge that go well beyond that. Right? So it's not really a fundamental beginning place of philosophy. It's a little bit of a trick to think that, because you couldn't even make that statement or have that thought without accepting the language that has been given you. And you have experienced your progression and your learning of that language. You have those thoughts and those memories of your history. And you, as you even said, and I think this is a great point, that by its very structures, language is a communal process. So all of those things precede you, right? And you can't even make that statement or have that thought without assuming that that whole universe of history, particularly your personal history, is real and exists.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
When I ask you the question again now, having just had that conversation, do you think we can know anything besides our perceptions?
When you start distrusting everything, there's no way you can actually even interact with the world at all. So, while you cannot view anything objectively, everything is through your eyes, there definitely are things outside of your own perception.
I think that in the history of philosophy, that's the case for every philosopher. Hegel is sort of the paradigm of what they call the idealists, and that being someone who believed that cognition or phenomena, that is what we experience, precedes the empirical world. But that's radically misinterpreted. Hegel was an empiricist about the universe and the world. He saw himself as a scientist. And he believed that the empirical world, that is the world of the natural world, existed prior to human cognition. What he actually says is that although the cognitive process developed naturally, it is that cognitive process now that defines how we perceive and interact with the world, and therefore, in some sense, it's logically prior to the natural world. In other words, you have to understand how our instrument works and how we perceive in order to properly understand what we are perceiving.
Yeah, basically he's saying, even though you can't view anything, like, objectively because you're always viewing it, like, through, like, yourself and, like, your eyes, you're able to understand that there was, like, something before you, and there was, like, a natural world that evolved to, like, make you, and that natural world existed before you.
Well, and you unpack the term objectively a little bit. It contains the word object. What we've done with science, to some degree, is literally make our rational decisions off of objective data by introducing instruments that record that data. Right? So it's not my perception of whatever natural phenomena we're talking about. Like, scientists will actually take an object to measure that world using something outside of us in that world, like a ruler. Like, you don't think the ruler is being subjective in its measurement of distance.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just a dumb object.
Yeah, yeah.
And what I think that we're beginning to see is that the skeptical argument is based on too high of a standard for what truth is.
Yeah.
If you want truth as in something that is completely devoid of humanness in it, we'll never get there.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally we are humans that are making these determinations.
Truth in itself is a concept created by us.
Exactly right. So this whole concept, though, of of non-objectivity has really infiltrated modern internet culture in sort of a political, social way. You know, you can't say anything about who I am or what I am because I'm the only one who knows what I am, and everyone's opinion is sort of almost equally valid. And
Well, people are saying things like that. They're like, oh, well, I'm the only one that can understand myself, and opinions are all valid and stuff like that. And that is technically true. And everyone does have like a depth to them that cannot just be perceived through a screen on the internet. But in saying that, you are like devolving into like such a self-centered view of yourself. You're kind of contradicting yourself because you're saying like, oh, well, like, you know, you don't understand me and all opinions are valid, but you are really only actually believing that your opinion is valid because you're the only one that can actually like understand yourself.
yeah, I think that it has devolved into a somewhat naive sense of skepticism, and I think it can be dangerous. So in our discussion of the first sense of being, phenomenology versus empiricism, I think that we're kind of in a middle ground a little bit. There's a natural world that exists prior to us and from which we developed, but that we are not able to talk or discuss or perceive that natural world outside of who we are.
We hope that you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please consider checking out the next one in the series.
Or some of our other series on philosophy and life.
We upload videos every Friday, so don't forget to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. See you next week.
Good.
All right. Yeah. Oh, the camera wasn't working. I'm just kidding.